Somewhere in the Carolina Low Country, a powerful secret was buried beneath the layers of family archives. A transaction that violated every moral code, orchestrated by a woman whose inability to bear children led her to a monstrous solution. For 12 years, a child lived in one of Charleston's grandest houses, never knowing the true identity of his mother. Tonight, we begin the story of a deception so vast it required a conspiracy reaching from the parlor to the quarters, maintained by fear and silence, a revelation that ultimately tore apart one of South Carolina's most prominent families. If you are ready to uncover the darkest historical mysteries, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy and tell us where you're listening from. Our story begins in 1843 at the Rutledge Plantation, a 3,000-acre estate on the Ashley River. Nathaniel Rutledge, 37, and his wife, Catherine, 32, were the subject of uncomfortable whispers in Charleston society. After 7 years of marriage, Catherine remained barren, a fact confirmed by doctors who brutally informed her her womb was inhospitable to the generative process. For Catherine, the stakes were existential. A barren wife risked being set aside and losing her status. It was Catherine who conceived the solution. Spending her days on the veranda, she began to study the enslaved women of the household, particularly Delilah. Delilah was 22, literate and light-skinned, the product of generations of forced mixture, with features that could pass for white in dimmer light. Catherine began treating Delilah with unsettling attention, asking private questions about her health and cycles. By summer, Catherine's plan was fully formed. She would have Nathaniel father a child on Delilah, then claim the child as her own, and raise it as the legitimate white heir to the Rutledge fortune. The logistics were complex. Catherine fabricated mysterious ailments requiring privacy, ordered a secluded cottage built for her recovery, and replaced older, trustworthy house slaves with younger women who were easier to control. Then, on a sweltering night in August, Catherine presented her plan to Nathaniel. In Nathaniel's study, surrounded by law books, Catherine presented her plan not as a moral crime, but as a practical solution to secure their dynasty. She quickly overcame Nathaniel's initial shock by appealing to his vanity and fear of his brother inheriting the plantation. They agreed to every detail: a staged pregnancy using padding and seclusion, a birth in the remote cottage, and a return months later with a healthy infant whose parentage would be ambiguous enough to pass. The silence of the enslaved would be enforced by their very powerlessness. The implementation began immediately. Catherine staged her delicate condition, retiring early and limiting visitors. Delilah, moved into an isolated room, was promised special treatment for carrying the child, while the unstated alternative hung heavy in the air. For months, Catherine endured a grotesque pantomime of pregnancy, padding her clothing while Delilah's actual condition was hidden beneath loose dresses and a rich diet. Nathaniel fulfilled his role with grim efficiency, visiting Delilah on 3 consecutive nights in September, refusing to acknowledge the horror of the act beyond the physical requirement. The birth occurred in late April in the cottage, during a fierce thunderstorm that muffled Delilah's 14 hours of labor. As soon as the healthy boy emerged, Catherine moved with decisive speed. The infant was taken immediately from Delilah's arms, wrapped, and carried to the main house where Catherine staged her elaborate scene of exhaustion and triumph, announcing the arrival of William Nathaniel Rutledge, the heir. Delilah was given laudanum and kept isolated for 6 weeks, her breasts painfully engorged with milk meant for the child she would never feed. When she returned, it was as the wet nurse to her own son. This arrangement, deemed too risky, lasted only 3 months before Catherine hired a nurse from a neighboring plantation. Delilah was then reassigned to the cotton fields, removed entirely from the main house and forbidden from coming within sight of the child she had borne. The deception, it seemed, was complete. Catherine became a devoted mother, constantly watching William obsessively for any sign that might betray his true parentage. To her immense relief, William grew into a handsome child with fair skin and light brown hair, showing no features that might prompt uncomfortable questions. He looked exactly like the legitimate son of 2 prominent white families. Nathaniel, for his part, buried the truth so deeply in his consciousness that he rarely acknowledged it even to himself. Nathaniel treated William with genuine affection, schooling him in management and presenting him as the heir to Charleston society, showing no outward sign of guilt. The enslaved community, however, remembered everything. They watched Delilah, the highly intelligent, light-skinned woman who had carried the heir, being brutally worked in the fields, her previous refinement counting for nothing. Catherine had reneged on every implied promise, and Delilah endured her harsh fate with a numb resignation. Her father, Isaac the Cooper, was powerless, his rage and worry making him gaunt. As William grew, the contrast was stark. He played in manicured gardens while Delilah toiled under the whip, separated by a gulf that Catherine had engineered to be unbridgeable. In the summer of 1856, the first crack appeared in the deception. William, now 11, visited Isaac's shop. The Cooper, usually reserved, kept glancing at the boy with an expression that looked almost like pain. When William asked if Isaac had children, the old man replied carefully, "Had a daughter. Still do, I suppose. She works the lower fields now." When William questioned why she didn't work in the main house, Isaac's jaw tightened. "Your mother has her reasons for everything she does, Master William." The unsettling encounter was quickly followed by a devastating revelation. Overwhelmed by curiosity, William picked the flimsy lock on Catherine's private desk and found her leather-bound journal. He skimmed mundane entries until he hit the pages from 1844. Catherine wrote of desperation, failed hopes, and then, in an entry dated August 1844, the words that stopped his breath. "I have conceived a solution. I have identified a suitable candidate among the house servants, young, healthy, light enough that the result should pass scrutiny." William's hands shook as he saw the next several entries had been torn out. The journal resumed months later. "William Nathaniel Rutledge was born today, the answer to all our prayers." The 11-year-old boy, old enough to understand the facts of conception and his mother's known barrenness, sat frozen. He understood, on some level, what his mother's careful words were truly describing. He put the journal back, walked out into the blazing sun, and felt cold despite the heat. The knowledge sat inside him like a stone, too frightening to examine directly. For several days, William moved in a daze, studying his parents with new eyes, searching for signs of the deception his mother's journal had revealed. He saw anxiety and calculation in Catherine's gaze, and a performative pride in Nathaniel's. He knew he shouldn't dig deeper, but his 11-year-old curiosity was an impossible physical force. He began asking casual questions of the house servants about women who had been moved to field work. Their universal evasiveness confirmed his suspicions. If there was nothing to hide, why the discomfort? His inquiries quickly reached Catherine. That evening, she summoned him for a conversation about appropriate behavior. Catherine, composed but cool, told him that the private affairs of this household are not appropriate topics for interrogating our servants. She then softened her voice, but delivered the chilling core of her warning. There are things that are not discussed, not questioned, not examined too closely. A gentleman learns to respect those boundaries. William understood perfectly. Stop asking questions. However, Catherine's warning accomplished the opposite. By telling him not to investigate, she confirmed there was something worth investigating. The stone of guilty knowledge inside him had grown heavier. The revelation came not through investigation, but through terrible chance. In late August, a fever swept the quarters. Isaac, Delilah's father, and the Cooper fell seriously ill. Delilah was granted permission to move into his cabin to nurse him. William, unable to sleep due to the oppressive heat, slipped out of the house. He had already gathered the key pieces of information: the name Delilah, her age, 34, and her reassignment to fieldwork around the time of his birth. Telling himself he was just seeking cool air, his feet carried him toward the dark, quiet slave quarters. Only Isaac's cabin showed a flicker of light. William approached slowly, his heart hammering, as he heard voices inside. A man's weak rasp and a woman's soft responses. Pressed against the cabin wall, William overheard the agonizing exchange. Isaac, knowing he was dying, pleaded with his daughter, "That boy, the one at the big house, you gotta tell him the truth someday." Delilah, heartbroken, resisted, citing fear of Mistress Catherine. But Isaac, speaking with terrible strength, described the violation. "I saw what they did to you. Saw how they took that baby from your arms before you could even hold him proper." He insisted William deserved to know his mother, not the woman who stole him. Finally broken, Delilah sobbed, "I promise, Papa. I promise I'll tell him someday when it's safe." The truth was now confirmed beyond doubt. Delilah, the field hand he had never properly looked at, was his real mother. William pushed the door open. Delilah's head snapped up, her face wet with tears, her shock quickly giving way to fear. They stared at each other, the stolen child and the woman who bore him. William saw her fully for the first time. Thin, worn by field labor, but with a refinement that echoed his own features. "Is it true?" William's voice cracked. "Are you my mother?" Delilah looked at her father, who gave a barely perceptible nod. She knew denial was useless and cruel. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am." The world tilted. William stepped inside and sat down, his legs finally giving out. "Tell me," he commanded. "Tell me everything. I want to know how. I need to understand." Delilah began to speak with a flat recitative quality, describing events as if they happened to someone else. She detailed Catherine's desperation and her own selection, noting that her literacy and house training only made her useful in a different way. She recounted the 3 nights Nathaniel came to her room, how he treated the act like a distasteful chore, never speaking beyond bare instructions. "He never looked at my face. Not once. I don't think he wanted to see me as human." William felt sick, finally grasping the full vile mechanics of his own conception. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Delilah's story continued, detailing the violence and violation that brought William into existence. She described her isolated pregnancy, where she would talk to him and sing songs, knowing they were lies because he would never be truly hers. She recounted the 2 minutes she held him before Catherine tore him away, listening to his cries as he was carried off, a pain that made her pray for death. The ultimate cruelty was her brief reassignment as his wet nurse. "I fed you for 3 months, Delilah whispered. "I held you in my arms and gave you my milk and looked at your face and couldn't say a word about what you were to me." William finally asked why she was brutally reassigned to fieldwork. "Because I was dangerous," Delilah stated simply. Catherine couldn't risk her accidentally revealing the truth through some tenderness or claim. Delilah confessed she had been watching him every chance I got for 12 years, memorizing his face as he grew into someone she could never claim, and it killed me a little bit more every single day. Tears streamed down William's face as he apologized for his ignorance. Delilah knelt before him, taking his scarred hands. "You are a child. None of this is your fault." William, desperate, asked, "What am I supposed to be if you're my mother?" "You're my son," Delilah said. "That's all that matters to me." Isaac, rousing briefly, confirmed it. "You're my grandson. Got my mother's eyes." The second devastating truth settled on William when Delilah confirmed that all the enslaved people knew his true identity. "Secrets like this don't stay secret among us," she said. Every "Yes, Master William" he'd ever heard was delivered by someone forced into a conspiracy of silence, knowing he was one of them, stolen and raised as something he wasn't. "What do I do now?" he asked, the question hanging heavy. Delilah admitted she didn't know. Her world and his were not meant to overlap. She couldn't wish her world on him. You crossing that line wouldn't make you free in my world. It would just make you enslaved like me. But William countered, "But you are claiming me. Right now you're telling me the truth. That means something." Delilah smiled, acknowledging her weakness and the devastating cost of wanting him to know where he came from. Outside, the approaching dawn signaled the end of this impossible moment of connection. Despite the immense danger, William asked, "Can I come back to see you again?" Delilah agreed, cautioning him that the consequences of discovery would be terrible for both of us. William left the cabin, his entire sense of self shattered and reforming. The boy who returned to the main house was a stranger in his own life, now seeing the slave quarters as home to his people, and the grand house as built on a lie. 3 days later, Isaac died. William watched the simple burial from a distance, understanding that any public display of grief for his grandfather would raise unanswerable questions. He mourned privately for the relationship stolen from him by Catherine's scheme. Catherine, noticing his distraction, cornered him in the library. She attributed his distress to Isaac's death, advising him to maintain proper distance because, these people, they're not like us. They don't feel things the same way we do. William wanted to scream the truth at her, that his mother was one of these people, but he kept silent, letting her believe she had settled his troubles. William became a skillful actor, playing the role of dutiful son and future planter. But in the early mornings and late evenings, he sought out Delilah for brief, shadow-filled meetings. She taught him what no white child was meant to know: the brutal realities of the system, the networks of resistance, the African heritage that flowed in his veins. "You carry Africa in you whether the world acknowledges it or not," she told him. These revelations were both painful and liberating. William learned that identity was about what you chose to acknowledge, not what society told you were. However, knowing the truth and acting on it were two different things. He was legally white, the recognized heir. Delilah was enslaved. As his 12th birthday approached, William grappled with the impossible question: what was he supposed to do with the knowledge of his true origins? He knew publicly exposing the truth would only lead to his own enslavement, Delilah's separation and punishment, and Catherine and Nathaniel simply inventing a new protective lie. William realized with bitter clarity that truth had no power in a world built on lies. Running away was impossible. He chose to adapt, living with cognitive dissonance. Publicly, he was William Rutledge, the white heir. He married a white woman and perpetuated the same lies and silences that defined his own upbringing. He justified his choices as practical, telling himself that preserving his position gave him the power to ameliorate some suffering. But in the dark hours, he knew he was choosing comfort over truth, and choosing to benefit from a system he knew to be evil. Delilah never blamed him, finding peace in the small mercy that her son knew her and loved her in private. She died in 1871 at age 49, worn out by bondage. William, then 38, attended her funeral as a distant white man. After the others left, he stood by the fresh grave and cried for the first time since he was 11, grieving the stolen relationship and his own choice of complicity over confrontation. In his will, William left a small bequest to the descendants of Isaac the Cooper, a veiled, insufficient gesture toward justice. The secret died with him, protected by silence, but the truth persisted in the genealogies kept by black families and the DNA that carried the memory forward. The Rutledge Plantation stands today as a historic site, its main house preserved, its official story praising its antebellum elegance. There is nothing about Delilah, nothing about the theft of her child or the lifetime of silence. That silence is its own monument, a testament to the power of lies backed by law and custom, and a reminder that injustice doesn't require monsters, only ordinary people willing to accept comfort purchased through the suffering of others. As one of them forced into an impossible position, or as a betrayer who chose comfort over truth? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more stories like this, historical mysteries that reveal the darkest corners of American history, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy. Hit that notification bell and share this video with someone who appreciates the unsettling truth behind the lies we tell ourselves.